As mist lifted from the swampy lowlands along the Gulf Coast of what is now Mexico, the Olmec world emerged slowly and confidently, shaped by rivers, seasonal rains, and dense forests that seemed alive with sound and movement, creating a dramatic setting where the first great civilization of the Americas could experiment with power, belief, cooperation, and creativity long before history had a written voice. Long before stone cities rose elsewhere in the hemisphere, Olmec communities learned how to read their environment with patience and care, guiding water through fields, choosing settlement sites wisely, and building lives that balanced farming, fishing, hunting, and trade within a landscape that could feel generous during one season and deeply challenging during the next. Travelers approaching an Olmec ceremonial center would not encounter towering walls or endless stairways, but instead discover earthen platforms, wide open plazas, and carefully arranged mounds that quietly revealed long-term planning, shared effort, and a society more interested in meaningful spaces than flashy structures meant only to impress outsiders. These early urban centers, including places archaeologists later called San Lorenzo and La Venta, function as powerful hubs where political authority, religious ritual, economic exchange, and social identity overlapped, allowing leaders to guide society while remaining closely tied to everyday activities that shaped ordinary lives. At the core of Olmec beliefs stood a deep understanding that the natural world and the human world were inseparable, meaning rainstorms, fertile soil, dangerous animals, and growing crops all participated in a shared cosmic system that demanded balance, respect, and thoughtful response from everyone involved. Religious specialists and leaders interpreted signs in the sky, patterns in the landscape, and movements of animals, using these observations to guide ceremonies intended to maintain harmony between forces that could support communities or threaten them if ignored. Transformation played a central role in Olmec imagination, especially the blending of human and animal qualities, which appeared again and again in stories, symbols, and artworks, suggesting that leaders held special connections to powerful spiritual forces beyond ordinary experience. This worldview is most clearly visible in Olmec art, which communicates authority and mystery through carefully carved stone, polished jade, and expressive forms that still capture attention today because they balance realism with symbolism in deliberate and thoughtful ways. The colossal stone heads, perhaps the most famous Olmec creations, rise from the past with calm yet commanding expressions, each carved from massive basalt boulders transported across rivers and plains through careful planning, cooperation, and determination rather than any magical shortcut. These enormous heads likely represented rulers or important figures, wearing distinctive helmets and facial features that emphasized individuality, memory, and leadership, suggesting that personal identity mattered and that powerful people deserved to be remembered long after their lifetimes ended. Transporting and carving such massive stones required coordinated labor across communities, reinforcing social bonds while also reminding everyone who possessed the authority and organizational skill necessary to guide large-scale projects successfully. Beyond the stone heads, Olmec artisans produced intricate jade figurines, masks, ceremonial tools, and symbolic objects, choosing materials that were rare and difficult to shape, which added layers of spiritual and social meaning to every finished piece. Jade, valued for its color, hardness, and symbolic association with life and renewal, traveled along extensive trade routes connecting the Olmec heartland with distant regions, proving that the exchange of objects also carried ideas, styles, and beliefs. Trade networks moved obsidian, shells, pigments, feathers, and crafted goods between regions, linking communities that lived in very different environments but shared curiosity, practical needs, and a willingness to cooperate for mutual benefit. Markets and exchange gatherings likely buzzed with conversation and negotiation as traders compared quality, sources, and stories, while also learning about distant lands through voices, gestures, and objects rather than written descriptions. Olmec farmers supported this complex society by growing maize, beans, squash, and other crops, adapting agricultural techniques to wetlands and seasonal flooding while depending on collective effort and shared knowledge passed down through generations. Successful harvests produced surplus food that allowed leaders, artisans, priests, and traders to focus on specialized roles, while poor seasons reminded everyone how closely survival depended on cooperation and careful planning. Food storage and redistribution became acts of trust and responsibility, reinforcing the idea that leadership involved protecting community stability rather than simply enjoying privilege or status. Rivers served as natural highways through dense forests and wetlands, allowing people, ideas, and goods to move more efficiently than over land while shaping settlement patterns that favored access to water and transportation. Canoes traveling along these waterways connected farming villages to ceremonial centers, reinforcing the sense that the Olmec world functioned as an interconnected system rather than a collection of isolated communities. Political authority among the Olmecs likely combined religious influence, control of resources, persuasive leadership, and tradition, creating systems of power that relied on shared belief rather than constant displays of force. Ceremonial gatherings reinforced this authority, using music, offerings, movement, and symbolic performance to communicate cosmic stories that explained why society was organized the way it was. Early ball courts found at Olmec sites hint at the importance of ritual games that blended sport, symbolism, and political meaning into events that were both exciting and deeply serious. These ball games represented struggles between opposing forces, echoing themes of balance, renewal, and sacrifice that lay at the heart of Olmec spiritual thinking. Participation in rituals strengthened community identity, reminding everyone that personal effort contributed to something larger and more enduring than individual success. Olmec society included farmers, craftspeople, traders, priests, leaders, and laborers, each contributing skills and knowledge that kept the system flexible and resilient across generations. Children learned by watching adults work, listening to stories, and helping with daily tasks, absorbing cultural values through experience rather than formal instruction. Stories passed orally explained origins, responsibilities, and dangers, shaping behavior in ways that felt natural and deeply connected to shared memory. Architecture reflected these values, emphasizing open ceremonial spaces and platforms that supported gatherings and movement rather than enclosed areas designed for isolation. Large construction projects encouraged cooperation and reinforced respect for those who planned, organized, and guided collective labor effectively. Over time, Olmec influence spread beyond its core region, visible in shared artistic styles, religious symbols, and social practices adopted by neighboring cultures. This influence reflected inspiration rather than direct control, showing how ideas can travel widely without armies or empires. Later Mesoamerican civilizations borrowed and adapted Olmec ideas about ritual, space, symbolism, and leadership, transforming them creatively within new contexts. Because of this lasting impact, historians often describe the Olmecs as a foundational culture whose experiments shaped future developments across the region. Such influence required openness to exchange as well as confidence in local identity, allowing ideas to flow without being lost. Environmental challenges continued to shape Olmec choices as flooding, soil changes, and shifting river courses demanded adaptation and resilience. Communities responded by adjusting farming methods, relocating centers, and rethinking trade routes rather than abandoning cooperation. Religious interpretation helped explain these changes, reinforcing the idea that humans must respond respectfully to powerful natural forces. Art and ritual evolved alongside environmental shifts, maintaining continuity while allowing new expressions to emerge. Even without extensive written records, the Olmecs communicated values through symbols and monuments that spoke across generations. Placement of monuments within landscapes added meaning, turning movement through space into part of ritual experience. Visitors experienced ceremonies through sound, sight, and motion, shaping emotion and memory without lengthy explanation. Power flowed through relationships and shared understanding, creating stability across centuries. Periods of rebuilding and reorganization reveal adaptation rather than sudden collapse. Materials were reused and sites reimagined, showing practical thinking combined with respect for tradition. Some centers lost prominence while others gained importance, reflecting shifting priorities rather than failure. Olmec identity continued through influence and memory even as specific cities changed. Artifacts traveled far from their origins, inspiring new interpretations elsewhere. Such spread demonstrates that ideas often move farther than armies ever could. Modern archaeologists reconstruct Olmec life through patterns, fragments, and careful comparison. Each discovery adds detail to a story built patiently over time. Mystery becomes an invitation to learn rather than a problem to fear. For young learners today, the Olmecs offer a powerful example of innovation rooted in environment, belief, and cooperation. Their achievements challenge narrow ideas about where civilization begins. They show that complex societies can emerge in many landscapes. Understanding the Olmecs requires imagination guided by evidence, blending science and storytelling. This approach mirrors how the Olmecs themselves interpreted their world. They observed, adapted, and responded creatively. These qualities allowed them to shape a lasting legacy. As the first major civilization in the Americas, they set patterns others would transform. Their story begins with gradual organization rather than sudden dominance. That beginning makes their accomplishments even more impressive. It reveals how cooperation builds power over time. From muddy fields to monumental stone, Olmec life blended practicality with vision. Every tool, ritual, and artwork reflected collective choice. Those choices created a world that felt meaningful to its people. The Olmecs remind us that history is shaped by communities as much as individuals. They also remind us that creativity grows from careful observation. As this chapter continues, the foundations laid by the Olmecs will echo forward. As Olmec influence continued to ripple outward, neighboring communities did not simply copy what they saw, but instead interpreted Olmec ideas through their own traditions, environments, and needs, creating a dynamic cultural conversation rather than a one-directional flow of power. Symbols associated with Olmec religion and authority appeared hundreds of miles away, carved into stone, painted on pottery, or echoed in ceremonial layouts, suggesting that ideas could travel farther and faster than people ever expected in a world without roads or written maps. Rather than ruling vast territories directly, the Olmecs shaped the region by inspiring shared ways of thinking about leadership, ritual, space, and the relationship between humans and the natural world. This influence explains why later Mesoamerican civilizations seemed to speak a familiar symbolic language even while developing very different political systems and artistic styles. Olmec ceremonial centers likely hosted visitors from distant regions who arrived curious, cautious, and eager to learn, carrying home stories that blended observation with imagination. Such visits reinforced prestige because being seen as a place worth traveling to mattered just as much as controlling land or resources. Leadership within Olmec society depended heavily on persuasion, ritual authority, and the ability to coordinate people effectively rather than on constant physical force. Rulers demonstrated legitimacy through successful ceremonies, impressive construction projects, and the ability to maintain balance during times of uncertainty. When floods damaged fields or rivers shifted their courses, leaders were expected to respond wisely, adjusting plans while explaining events within accepted spiritual frameworks. Failure to maintain harmony could weaken authority, reminding everyone that power carried responsibility rather than guaranteed privilege. Daily life continued beneath these larger systems, shaped by routines that felt stable even as generations passed. Families organized work around farming seasons, shared meals prepared from familiar crops, and passed down skills through demonstration rather than formal instruction. Children grew up learning when to plant, how to craft tools, and why certain places mattered spiritually, absorbing lessons naturally through participation. Craft specialization increased over time, allowing artisans to refine techniques and experiment with form, symbolism, and materials. Stone carving reached remarkable levels of precision, revealing patience, planning, and an understanding of how visual impact could communicate authority without words. Jade working required particular skill because mistakes could ruin valuable material, reinforcing the idea that expertise earned respect. These crafts were not created for decoration alone, because objects often served ceremonial or symbolic purposes tied to belief systems. Ritual objects linked participants to ancestors, deities, and cosmic forces, reinforcing shared identity across communities. Music, movement, and sound played roles in ceremonies, shaping emotional experience and collective memory. Drums, flutes, and voices combined to transform gatherings into immersive events rather than passive observations. Through repetition, ritual patterns became familiar, offering stability in a changing world. The ballgame, with its formalized movement and symbolic meaning, served as both entertainment and serious ritual expression. Participants reenacted cosmic struggles through play, reinforcing beliefs about balance, renewal, and responsibility. Spectators learned values through observation, excitement, and shared emotional response. Such events strengthened social bonds, reminding everyone that community participation mattered. Environmental conditions continued to influence Olmec choices, requiring flexibility rather than rigid tradition. Wetlands demanded careful water management, while forest resources required sustainable use. Overexploitation could threaten survival, encouraging respect for natural limits. These pressures reinforced the Olmec worldview that humans existed within, not above, nature. When certain centers declined, people relocated rather than disappearing, carrying knowledge with them. New ceremonial centers emerged, reflecting shifting priorities and adaptations. This pattern of movement reveals resilience rather than collapse. Olmec culture transformed gradually, adjusting to new realities. Archaeological layers show continuity beneath change, connecting early and later phases. Even as monumental construction slowed in some regions, symbolic traditions endured. Memory preserved identity even when landscapes changed. Later civilizations remembered Olmec influence indirectly through shared symbols and myths. The Olmecs became ancestors in cultural imagination rather than political rulers. Modern scholars piece together this story through excavation, comparison, and cautious interpretation. Each carved stone, buried offering, or altered landscape adds a sentence to an incomplete narrative. Unanswered questions invite curiosity rather than frustration. Mystery keeps the Olmecs alive in historical discussion. For young readers, this uncertainty becomes an invitation to imagine responsibly. Understanding the Olmecs requires patience, empathy, and attention to evidence. It also requires letting go of simple stories about rise and fall. The Olmecs did not vanish suddenly, but evolved through influence. Their legacy spread quietly rather than loudly. Ideas outlasted buildings and rulers. This endurance explains why historians call them foundational. They provided starting points rather than final answers. Later societies expanded, revised, and challenged these beginnings. The Olmecs show how experimentation shapes civilization. They remind us that first attempts matter, mistakes became lessons, and successes became models. Such processes feel familiar even today. Innovation often grows from local needs. Connection accelerates that growth. The Olmecs balanced both. They observed their world closely. They responded creatively. They organized collectively. Through these choices, they built something lasting. Their story reframes how we think about early civilization. It highlights cooperation over conquest. It emphasizes belief alongside technology. It places environment at the center of history. As this chapter closes, the Olmecs stand not as distant mysteries, but as thoughtful builders of culture whose influence continues to shape how the ancient Americas are understood.